Welcome to The Explainer, where we break down complex topics using the sources themselves. Today, we're going to tackle this really strange paradox of Russia's wartime economy and what it all means for the chances of peace in Ukraine.
Okay, so let's dive right into the heart of the puzzle. On one hand, you hear all the time that Russia's economy is struggling, that it's just crippled by sanctions. But then, on the other hand, Moscow is out there confidently rejecting peace proposals. So what is really going on here? To get to the bottom of it, we've got to look at what's actually on the negotiating table.
And let me tell you, right now, that table is looking more like a diplomatic dead end. The gap between what the West is proposing and what Russia is demanding, well, it's enormous.
There's a proposal out there, and it's backed by leaders in both the US and Europe. And it sounds pretty straightforward, right? Just freeze the fighting along the current battle lines. The thinking is, let's just stop the bloodshed. Draw a line right where everyone is now and use that as a starting point to actually talk.
But Russia's response? Yeah, that's a total non-starter. While the West is saying, let's stop here, Moscow is demanding a complete Ukrainian withdrawal from eastern regions and full recognition of Russian sovereignty over the Donbass. For Kyiv, that's not a negotiation. That's basically a surrender. So this huge gap, it just begs the question, where is Moscow getting all this confidence?
Well, the answer, at least on the surface, is pretty wild. It seems like Russia's economy is actually thriving because of the war, not in spite of it.
Just look at military spending. It has tripled since the invasion began. We're talking about a jump from around $50 billion to nearly $150 billion. That is a massive, state-funded stimulus package just being pumped right into the economy.
And all that cash being spent on weapons? Well, it's acted like a giant vacuum cleaner, sucking up all the available labor. The result? Unemployment has just plummeted to its lowest point in 3 decades. Factories are humming, people have jobs. And this really shows just how incredibly adaptable Russia's been. When Europe stopped buying its energy, Moscow just pivoted and started selling its oil and gas to China and India. By 2024, its economic growth was actually outpacing most advanced nations, including the US. I mean, the entire economy, everything from bread factories to shipyards, has been put on a war footing. But, and this is a huge but, this whole wartime boom is really deceptive. Because if you look just beneath the surface, the Russian economy is showing some very deep, very dangerous cracks in its foundation.
Which of course brings us to the million-dollar question, right? An economy that's built on making tanks and shells instead of, cars and computers, that's got a pretty limited shelf life. So how long can Russia actually keep this whole thing up?
Right now, Russia is spending way more than it's taking in. And to cover that gap, it's draining its national wealth fund. That's basically its big rainy day savings account. Some analysts are projecting that at this current burn rate, those reserves could be pretty much gone by 2030. And you can see the real-world cost of this pivot everywhere. For one, those finite Soviet-era weapon stockpiles, they're being used up at an incredible rate. At the same time, civilian companies forced to make war materials are just bleeding money. A factory that used to make hockey sticks lost millions trying to make faulty bulletproof vests. A bread factory saw its profits tank after it was told to make drones. A shipyard lost over $40 million making simple potbelly stoves. You just can't run an economy like this. It's profoundly inefficient. And on top of all that, you have this rampant corruption just gutting the state from the inside. And get this for an example. Of the 504 billion rubles they seized from corrupt officials, it was reported that nearly 400 billion of it, that's almost $5 billion, was simply stolen all over again before it ever made it to the budget.
So this underlying fragility, this ticking clock, it hasn't gone unnoticed. And it's led the West to consider a much more powerful economic counterpunch to try and force Moscow's hand. The big threat on the table is something called secondary sanctions. And the idea here is simple. It's not just about sanctioning Russia anymore, it's about threatening to sanction anyone who helps Russia. Okay, so let's walk through how this could trigger a just devastating chain reaction. Imagine the US hits Chinese and Indian companies buying Russian oil with massive tariffs. Suddenly, those companies have a choice: do business with Russia or do business with the much, much larger US market. It's a no-brainer. They would almost certainly choose the US and cut off Russia's main energy buyers overnight. And for a government that relies on oil for up to half its budget, the result wouldn't just be a problem, it would be absolutely catastrophic.
So when you put all these pieces together, what do you get?
Well, it really starts to look like Russia's tough guy diplomatic stance might just be a high-stakes bluff masking a desperate, hidden need for a break.
And this is the core tension, right? Publicly, Russia is projecting this image of unyielding strength and making these maximalist demands. But privately, its economy reveals an urgent need for a pause, a timeout, to rearm, to replenish its stockpiles, and to stabilize this deeply fragile and inefficient system.
So why? Why can the leadership maintain this incredibly risky bluff, even with their economy on a timer? Well, it really comes down to one simple, kind of brutal fact. Who actually feels the economic pain?
Russia is one of the most unequal major economies on the planet. And while the official numbers you see here might not look like the absolute worst, some studies that try to account for the massive amount of wealth hidden offshore by the elite suggest it could actually be the most unequal country in the world. And what that means is the people making the decisions, they are completely insulated from the consequences. They don't feel the inflation, they don't feel the shortages, or the long-term decay.
And all of this leaves us with one final, critical question. We know Russia's economy is on a countdown to a major crisis. But can economic reality actually force change in a political system that seems to be designed specifically to ignore the welfare of its own people? That right there is the high-stakes paradox at the very heart of this war. And understanding it is key to understanding why this devastating conflict and its terrible human cost continues.